be in first group. I brought in all these lessons for the previous class, and he said, to talk about it. He said, no. He said, I'll do it next week. And this week he comes in and says, no, I'm not.
Did I literally say we'll do it next week, or did I say?
Changed his mind.
I changed my mind.
It's okay.
And I apologize. I said we'd go into that sidebar about the things that were an actual sin to think about or not. We'll get into sin. We'll get into how the Beinoni handles thought in this chapter. But I'm very excited to start chapter 12. It's a lot to talk about. We'll probably need a few classes to get through it. This is really very much at the heart of the Tanya. Does anyone need 11 and 12? Has everybody got that? So a little small class today, but no worries. I know we were joined online by people now and later.
So I had a lot of questions about 11.
Yeah.
But maybe it's going to be answered, like, what are the sins? Who lists the sins? Who's in charge of making the sins?
Yeah, I don't think we need to focus on the details of the sins. Let's each person, you know what a sin means in your life, and you know what a mitzvah means in your life. So let's stick with that. I think that's the most useful. Obviously, traditionally it would be the oral tradition, all the sins and all the mitzvahs.
Well, okay.
But yeah, I think for us, everybody has things that they feel like, this I'd like to do. I'd like to give more tzedakah. I'd like to not get angry ever. I'd like to learn more. I'd like to come to temple on Shabbat. Those are my mitzvahs. Everybody has sins. I'd like to not, you name it. And so
It's better.
why don't we just start by working on those, right? Things we know already. We have goals in our lives. If that happens to lead to other goals, good. But I don't see, for this class, the point is finding positive spiritual direction. I don't want to get into the endless details of, what are the oral tradition we're gonna focus on.
That's a good answer.
Thank you.
That is.
I like my answer to Rick. Is anybody in the class tonight? Is anybody taking my?
I can't come tonight. I'm going to, Yaffa Epstein speaking at JCC, and
Okay.
she was out of sight.
Oh, good.
So I have to watch that online.
Very good.
I may or may not.
So chapter 9, we looked at the battle between the souls. Chapter 10, we looked at the tzaddik and the different levels of a tzaddik, complete and incomplete. Chapter 11 looked at the rasha, which is most of humanity, and the different levels of a rasha. And now finally we get to what is a Beinoni, this question that we started all the way back in chapter 1. And finally, after now understanding the structure of the soul, its insides, the 10 sefirot, so to speak, the powers, and its outsides, the 3 garments, and the 2 souls we're dealing with, animal soul and divine soul. Now we're finally going to define, for our purposes of working on ourselves, what a Beinoni is. And in future chapters, we'll get all kinds of meditations and exercises and strategies to actually try to become a Beinoni, try to transform ourselves higher and higher till we reach the level of a Beinoni, which we're told, although it's very difficult, we're all aware at this point, is possible for everyone in this room, everyone watching online. So we're on page 174 in Lessons in Tanya. Let's go straight to the Hebrew. והבינוני הוא שלעולם אין הרע גובר כל כך לכבוש את העיר קטנה. Nori, why don't you start, the Beinoni?
The Beinoni, intermediate man, is he in whom the evil of the animal soul never attains enough power to conquer the small city, the body, which is likened to a small city, which the divine and the animal soul both wish to dominate.
להתלבש בגוף להחטיאו.
So as to clothe itself in the body and make it sin.
Right, so this we know for sure. The Beinoni is someone who, now that we understand the structure of the soul, we're going to just talk about the garments. And only from the perspective of the garments, the Beinoni looks like a tzaddik. Thought, speech, and action, no difference between a Beinoni and tzaddik. Right? So while this war is happening and the 2 souls are struggling to express through the thought, speech, and action, in a Beinoni, the divine soul always comes out the winner. The divine soul always expresses, and not once, for any sustained amount of time, does the animal soul consciously and willfully express, even through thought. But we're only talking about the garments. And now I think we have a different level of sophistication, perhaps, around the structure of the soul. So what was confusing in chapter 1, where we said, well, hold on, if you do the slightest sin, if you waste 10 minutes playing a video game or looking at birds instead of learning Torah, now you're Russia. So who's the Beinoni, right? I mean, any tiny sin that you wouldn't even call a sin, such a slight deviation, and you're Russia. Otherwise, you're tzaddik. What's a Beinoni? The issue was we didn't understand the structure of the soul, perhaps, at that point. And now that we have that distinction, we can say only when you're talking about the three garments, thought, speech, and action, behavior of the soul, there a Beinoni is perfect all the time. But it has nothing to do with what's happening with the essence of the soul for our conversation, which is the intellect and the midot, the intellect and the emotions of the soul, not conscious thought or speech or action. דהיינו ששלושה לבושי נפש הבהמית שהם מחשבה, דיבור, מעשה שמצד הקליפה.
That is to say, the three garments of the animal soul, namely thought, speech, and action originating in the kalipa. That is, the forbidden thought, speech, and action which derive their vitality from kalipa, as explained in the previous chapters, are in the Beinoni so subdued that they
אין גוברים בו על נפש אלוקית להתלבש בגוף.
Do not prevail within him over the divine soul to the extent of clothing themselves in the body.
Right, so nothing that we discussed in the chapter about klipa, right, ever actually expresses in the Beinoni. The Beinoni is always coming from the side of holiness. So in other words, when they're actually consciously thinking, when they're speaking, and when they're doing something, that is always the nefesh elokit doing something. For our purposes, let's say it's always other-centered, it's always altruistic. And from a kabbalistic point of view, they're always engaging in some one of the connecting pathways, right? Either an intellectual pathway, which is learning, or a behavioral pathway, which is divine will, right? Which would be some mitzvah. Or if they're not actually doing that, they're focusing on getting ready to do it, right? I may be bird watching, but I'm bird watching for 10 minutes so I can get back to learning because I've had enough and I need a break and I'm going to come back, right? So a Rasha may be bird watching just because they don't feel like learning Torah or they don't feel like doing something productive and they feel like watching birds and it satisfies them. Worst thing in the world to do? No. But I'm doing it for me, so that's the animal soul expressing, so that's now a Rasha, right? They haven't sinned, but, well, technically you could say, perhaps. A Beinoni may be bird watching, but they're bird watching because they were just doing something nefesh elokit based, for instance, learning Tanya or something, and they said, okay, I'm tired now, give me 10 minutes of bird watching so I come back and learn again. So they're consciously bird watching so that they can then come back and continue the activities of the divine soul. So now that bird watching is an activity of the divine soul. So it might be the same actual activity that a Beinoni and Rush are doing, but one is doing it very subtly stemming from Nefesh Behamit, one is doing it very subtly stemming from Nefesh Elokit. But that hair we're splitting, that is all the difference between a tzaddik and a Beinoni, day to day. And there's more overt.
They'll have the nefesh elokit still in their body.
Behamit, yeah. So a Beinoni, we're just talking about behaviors, right?
The three garments.
Yeah.
So only the three, okay.
Yeah, but when I'm bird watching, what I'm doing, I'm thinking about birds consciously. Maybe I'm talking with someone about birds. I'm physically sitting and doing it. I'm maybe taking binoculars out and looking. So thought, speech, and action are engaged in bird watching. That's all external aspects of the soul. That tells me nothing about what the essence of the animal soul is doing. Is it trying to express in thought, speech, and action and not able to?
And the Beinoni continually does this, doesn't.
Only, continually, only, all the
Doesn't
time.
waver between being a Beinoni and a Russia.
No.
It's always being a Beinoni.
Yeah, as we'll see, someone who wavers in being quote unquote a Beinoni in Russia is a Russia.
Okay.
במוח ובפה ובשאר רמ"ח איברים לחטאים ולטמאם חס ושלום.
neither in the brain, so that the brain thinks forbidden thoughts with the animal soul's garment of thought, nor in the mouth to speak forbidden words, the garment of speech, nor in the other 248 organs to act in a forbidden manner, the garment of action. In none of these do the garments of the animal soul clothe themselves to cause them to sin and to defile God, forbid, in which case he would be a Rasha, not a Bani.
Right, and the Alter Rebbe picks his words carefully, so he says, not in the brain, not in the mouth, or any other 248 organs. So the brain is the organ used for thought, the mouth is the organ used for speech, and the other 248 organs are used for action. So I'm talking about my actual physical brain. The animal soul wants to seize it and express through it, and that's thought, that's a behavior. And in a Beinoni, the divine soul is always in control of the brain, as well as the mouth, as well as the rest of the body. רק שלושה לבושי נפש אלוקית הם לבדים מתלבשים בגוף שהם מחשבה, דיבור, מעשה של תרי"ג מצוות התורה.
Only the three garments of the divine soul, they alone manifest themselves in the body, these being the thought, speech, and action related to the 613 commandments of the Torah.
Right, so you remember when we talked about how we redefine Torah study and mitzvot kabbalistically, that a commandment isn't, you must do this or you must not do that. It's from tzavta, from connection. And that when we do what looks like a physical commandment, we're actually experiencing a kabbalistic connection with the Ein Sof, with this infinite God. And there's no way for us to bridge that gap from our side. Right? A finite being can't sit and come up with a meditation or sit and have so much devotion. There's no way we can reach the infinite because we're finite. There's an absolute gap. The only way for us to actually, we can have spiritual experiences, but the only way for us to actually connect, say, with the infinite is when the infinite reaches out. Because the infinite has the power to connect with the finite, but obviously the finite cannot bridge the gap. So when we do a mitzvah, that's actually us using how the infinite is reaching out to us. Something happened at Sinai, we received this transmission, said there's these connecting points that I want, and when you learn this, and when you give charity, and when you shake the lulav, wave the lulav and etrog, it makes no sense to you, I know, you're finite, but that's the way I want to connect with you, with my will. And when you learn these words, I know it looks like just another tradition, that's the way I want to reach out with you, with my intellect. And I can bridge the gap, even though you can't. So yeah, you want to meditate? Great. You'll have spiritual experiences. You'll get higher and higher in the spiritual, but I'm not in the spiritual. If you want to connect with me, these are the connecting points. So that's why, Kabbalistically, he can really say the way that we connect with the divine is through those channels, the different commandments and Torah study, and that is the thought, speech, and action of the divine soul, right? And if you look at, I know I'm using these two paradigms, one being other-centeredness and the other being Torah mitzvahs, right? But if you look, there's quite a bit of overlap. Most of the things that we think about as being just good stuff, other-centered stuff, helpful stuff, in some way or another, it's a mitzvah, right? Just v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love another like yourself, right? So someone calls me, oh, I got a flat tire, and I got to get up in the night and go help them, right? Is it a mitzvah? No. I could do it or not do it. I'm not breaking commandment by not doing it. Let someone else do it. But there's a mitzvah, love another like yourself. And would I want someone to do that for me? Yes. So just being a mensch, just being other-centered, almost all the time you can find some way that it's actually a mitzvah. And the two aren't as different as you might think. That's a sidebar. Right, so for our purposes...
I'm having a little trouble with, and maybe I learned it incorrectly, but to me, Hasidism was a response to always studying.
Uh-huh.
And that it wasn't a high value that you would be studying in being a Hasid.
Yeah.
It was an alternative way to connect with God, and it didn't have to be study. So now we're hearing so much about study is the pathway, the highest pathway to get to God. I didn't see that as a value in what Chassid originally thought.
Yeah, it's a very good question, because you're right that a big part of this tradition was saying, you people that are learning 18 hours, you're not so elite.
Right.
The peasant who doesn't have time to learn and just says some psalms in the morning and manages a chapter of learning and then has to work all day is just as holy. And everyone said, what are you talking about? These are the holy people and these are the unlearned. There's no comparison. And the Baal Shem Tov said, no, right? You can, if you plant a potato so that you can raise your family, and if you so they can do mitzvahs, that's just as holy.
Right.
But we're talking about someone who doesn't have the opportunity to learn. Right? We're not talking about somebody who has the opportunity and decides, well, Hasidism says, learning isn't as holy as, it's not that. This was a situation where people were so poor and so had no opportunity to learn that they were depressed, and all they could do was get up before dawn and mumble out some psalms and rush through some learning and then go slave the whole day, right? So that's a very different situation than saying Torah learning is not our way of connecting with God. The Baal Shem Tov was saying, you have no idea the value of that Torah learning. You people that are in the yeshivas learning 18 hours a day and getting joy and brilliant, yes, I get that. But you're doing it all the time. You have no idea the value when an unlearned person struggles to get up and says psalms that they maybe don't even understand and rushes to learn a little bit of Torah while their feet are still frozen from working in the fields last night. You know what I mean? You have no idea the value of the learning of unlearned people. It's at a much higher level than you're learning. But at no point are we saying Torah learning is not chokhmah of the Ein Sof, right? So don't get the two confused. See what I mean? Hasidim never says Torah learning itself is somehow of a lower value than any other community believes. Yeah, good question. I'm glad we cleared that up, or I hope cleared some of it up.
Yeah.
And now here's a piece that there's all kinds of different approaches and all kinds of commentary. We'll have to take some time to look this through. V'lo avar avera miyamav v'lo ya'avor le'olam.
The Benjamin has never committed any transgression, nor will he ever transgress.
Oh, okay. Now I'm confused, right? V'lo nikra rav shem rasha afilu sha'achat v'rega echad kol yamav. And the name Rasha has never been applied, however temporarily, not even for a moment, throughout this person's life. Now I'm confused, right? Yeah. So what does this mean? All of us here, let me speak for myself, I've done sins recently and through my life, subtle and not so subtle. I'm a normal person, I've done sins. And now he says, the Benjamin has never committed a sin. The name Rasha has never been applied throughout his life. Does that mean I can never be a Benoni? Because now I've sinned, and now 10 years from now, no matter how hard I work, because I've sinned, I'm not a Benoni? So clearly he doesn't mean that. Right? He's been saying over and over, everyone has the potential to be a Benoni. This is a book for everyone. Any person can be a Benoni. So when he says a Benoni's never sinned, what he doesn't mean is if you've chronologically sinned in your life, then the next year or the next month or the next decade, now you can't be a Benoni because of that past sin. Right? We know it doesn't mean that. So we have to go somewhat deeper. And there's many approaches to trying to understand what the Alter Rebbe is talking about here. And because this is an important aspect of being a Benoni. The Benoni has never sinned, never will sin. Right? They're at that level.
Is he born a Benoni?
No. A Benoni, you work to become a Benoni.
Well,
Benoni's
he's never sinned.
right, so it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
We agree it doesn't make sense.
Isn't it? They have never since they become a baby.
That's one option. Okay. Let's look first at one idea which is actually taught, which is the effect of tshuva, of repentance. And we haven't talked so much about tshuva. He has a whole book in the Tanya about tshuva and the different pathways of tshuva and the kabbalistic approach to tshuva, to repentance. But one thing that tshuva does, which is remarkable, is it can actually transform the past. Right? In humanity, we believe time travel is not possible. Something that's happened has happened, and it can't be changed. But in Kabbalah, we know that there are points of view and there are activities we can do that are above time, and that can transform the past, for sure. So there's one kind of tshuva where you do tshuva and you say, I did this sin and I'm sorry, please forgive me, person, please forgive me, God, Yom Kippur, I'm so sorry, I say it honestly, and boom, tshuva, I'm forgiven. Right? So now this sin is no longer on my record. I'm no longer responsible for it legally, let's say, right? I'm not going to be punished for it in terms of reward and punishment spiritually. So I've done tshuva, and now I'm reconnected to the basic level of spirituality in my consciousness, and that's great. It's important. But I still did the sin. The sin is still a sin that I did, and I did tshuva for, right? So even though I did my time and I did tshuva, it's like I did a crime and then I went to jail for 6 months, and now I'm out of jail, and I can say, yeah, I committed the crime, went to jail, got out of jail, now I have a clean record. Well, I don't know if it's called a clean record, but it's done, right? But I still did a crime of some kind. There's a higher level of tshuva, which is tshuva to the first hay. If any of you remember the 4-letter name of God, there's tshuva where you turn the second hay. Teshuv hay means return the hay. So the word tshuva means return the hay. That's a whole class on that. But we're returning the lower hay for normal tshuva, and my thought, speech, and action is now kind of in line with my divine soul. There's a higher hay, which is the whole thing about divine breath. And when I get to tshuva of that level, right, which we can learn in another class what that is, I do more than just repent for that sin. I actually take that sin, I turn it into something that is now positive in my life, right? Because say I got caught stealing, and I paid a fine. It was so bad I went to jail for a while, and now I really realized the impact of stealing. I realized what it did to people around me. I realized what it did to me. I realized how bad it is ethically. And now I'm just really driven to not steal in any subtle way. I won't even watch a clip from a movie online that somebody stole. I won't, any normal things that people might do, I'm not going to do. I'm really just burning about not stealing anyway. Now that's who I am. So that act that I did of stealing, now that's driving me to actually go above and beyond normal behavior and be even better. And now that negative is actually a current positive. It's driving my positive behavior. So what I've done is I've taken the tshuva and I've turned it actually into something like a mitzvah. I've turned the negative into a positive. And if you do that deeply, 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 you can actually transform every sin you've done until it's not, I did a sin, I did tshuva for it, but no, it wasn't even a sin anymore. Now my sins became mitzvahs. It's a very lofty level of tshuva, where now, even though chronologically I can look back and say, yeah, I did this, I hurt these people, I was weak in these ways, but actually spiritually, those aren't sins anymore. They're actually become mitzvahs. And they're now positives in the universe because they're creating even more good now. But that's a high level of tshuva, right? So that's one way of explaining. If a Beinoni has done that level of tshuva, then yeah, you could say in their past they did X, Y, Z. But X, Y, Z, although on paper they're sins, now kabbalistically they're actually mitzvahs. So that Beinoni has never sinned in their life because they've done that level of tshuva. Can I get that?
I get it, but like in the Judah and Joseph story, there's no tshuva just because you say I'm sorry and you say it out loud and you have remorse. It only becomes tshuva when you change your behavior.
Of course, yeah.
That's tshuva.
And but that's the lower level of tshuva. Changing my behavior is a lower level of tshuva. I'm talking about a higher.
In other words, presented with the same set of circumstances, you
Yeah.
don't do again the
Yeah.
way you did before.
But that's not the level of tshuva I'm talking about. That's still the lower level of
That's
tshuva.
still low?
Yeah, I don't want to do a class on tshuva.
Okay.
This is just we could do that. But this is just, I want to show one explanation of the Beinoni. There's this very high level of tshuva beyond that,
Yeah.
where it's not just now I've changed my behavior, it's amplified my behavior beyond what is positive to like extra positive.
Okay.
So that would allow me to say, excuse me, that the Beinoni has never sinned. But the problem is not every Beinoni has reached that level of tshuva, honestly. One can be a Beinoni just by controlling one's thought, speech, and action without necessarily going to the level of higher tshuva for every sin that I may have done when I wasn't a Beinoni. So it doesn't really cover everything. So there's two other approaches I want to share. Remember the second? And the first is, yes. So the first is what we talked about. The first has to do with understanding the distinction between inner and outer, and that really on the inside, a Beinoni still has their nefesh b'hamit alive and powerful and trying to send them counterproductive impulses. And ideas will drop into their mind, ideas that may be problematic or sinful, but they're just at such a level of commitment that anytime it happens, they push it out of their conscious mind. Right? So they never willfully, consciously consider any of these ideas. Right? So my person who might consider stealing, so they're walking into a store and they see there's just one clerk and no one will be able to tell, and there's no cameras, and maybe I'll take some gum, right? Pops into their mind. No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to think about it. And they're at such a high level of commitment to that that it's just, there's no chance it's going to happen. It's never going to happen, right? It's like people who are in the military are trained and indoctrinated and pushed to certain behaviors. And maybe before I joined the Army, I'd get up and I'd sleep in for 45 minutes, and I wouldn't make my bed, and I'd kind of wander and get some, and I'd start the day late. When you're in the military, you just, from day one, you're trained, you get up and you get up, you make your bed, you get ready, you put your uniform on, and you go, right? And I assume after a year or two in the military, there's just no chance that you're going to wake up and say, yeah, I think I'm going to sleep in and not make my bed, right? It's just, you're not going to do that. Now, would it occur to you to do that if you were a soldier now already in the military? I suppose you could wake up and say, boy, it'd be nice to not have to make my bed. But of course, I'm not going to do that, right? I'm going to make my bed, right? There's no chance. And the way they see their past actions, it's kind of like the way we see childhood, for instance. There's things we would have done as a child. Maybe I would have teased somebody, or maybe I would have done something immature. And I know I did them chronologically, that was me, but I've changed so much that it's not really me. That was me child. That was me as a boy. And maybe I did some things that I'd be mortified if I would do anything close to that now, but I was a child. It wasn't really me. And it's not really that I did that, it was that me as a child did that. So the Bainani, this is your point, the Bainani as the Bainani, since they achieve that level of commitment to controlling their thought, speech, and action, they just would not do and will never do and have never done anything that would be a sin. And the fact that before they became Bainani, they might have done something, that's like they're almost so gone from that state of mind, that's not who they are. They've never sinned in their life as a Bainani. Because when they're in Russia, that was just another state of mind, like a soldier before they joined the army, or like an adult when they were a child. It's almost not them, they don't relate to it. So that's the second take, which is so a commitment of will to the extent that now it's just not possible, and even to the extent where when it had been possible, that wasn't even their identity, right? Once they became a Bainani, there wasn't any going back. They couldn't be a Bainani for a month and then drop down and make a few errors and then get back to be a Bainani and then have a bad day and get back to be a Bainani. It doesn't work like that, right? If you have the potential left to actually sin in thought, speech, or action, if there's any situation that you can encounter that would let you do that, now you're not a Bainani. Now you're still a Rasha, even if it doesn't look like it. Even if today I just sat on a mountain learning Torah and I had no opportunity to sin, so what? If the opportunity came, I might do it. That means I'm not a Bainani.
Is that maturity?
Yes, it is maturity, yeah. But it's maturity in its most complete sense, right? Because sometimes we confuse maturity with sophistication in North America, right? And I can seem mature with very self-centered habits, right? I mean, I could like fine wine and insist on fine wine every meal. That's a very mature, tasteful, sophisticated thing to do, and I can be really respected and honored for my knowledge of fine wine and how much I enjoy it. But, you know, if I'm doing it for myself, then that's still nefesh b'mit, right? So we're talking about it is maturity, but it's like holy maturity. Let's call it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if someone is just studying all the time and doesn't share his knowledge with anybody, isn't that kind of selfish of him, just to zap resources from somebody who had to work, and this guy who's sitting there studying is using up those resources?
Yeah, well, we'll leave the resources question aside, but you raise a good point. Even if you spend all your time studying, you can still be doing that in a self-centered way. So it's entirely possible to be, a completely halakhically righteous person, but be pretty much self-centered spiritually, right? You can be a bum who's actually within the bounds of Torah. I think Maimonides has a term for that, right? So of course, we want to work on ourselves being generous and learning and not just studying because I like to learn, I want to be close to God. And then there's a third,
So,
yeah.
so nobody's born a baby. What'd you say?
Nobody's, what did you say?
Born a baby?
Yeah, I'm not sure you could say nobody, but generally, yeah, Beinoni is something someone works to.
Somebody who was a Rasha and then either did the tshuva or changed his mind at a certain point in his life.
Yeah, it's a result of tremendous work and ongoing work. So this is something that normal, regular
So that brings
people.
out the maturity part.
Yeah,
what you're talking about.
yeah. So the first one is the tshuva explanation. The second one is the sense that there's a certain commitment, and now they don't really identify with their sins anymore. It's not them. There's a third one that I find very interesting. I'd like us to keep it in our conversation, and this is having to do with what we talked about the equilibrium between the two souls, right? So we have a nefesh elokit and nefesh b'amit. A tzaddik is someone who has weakened their nefesh b'amit to the extent that it's basically transformed to another nefesh elokit, and so there's an imbalance. A nefesh elokit always gets its way, and there's no struggle. A rasha is someone for whom the nefesh elokit is weakened to some extent, so the nefesh b'amit can sometimes, or a lot of the time, get its way. Right? So it has to do with the equilibrium of the souls. A Beinoni, their nefesh b'amit is usually at full strength. They've strengthened the nefesh elokit through maturity and through work to the extent now it's at full strength, and so they're at an equilibrium. And because of that, as we'll see in the next chapter, the nefesh elokit always gets its way in thought, speech, and action. Right? So being a Beinoni doesn't have to do with have I sinned or haven't I sinned. Being a Beinoni has to do with have I kept my nefesh elokit at full strength or has something weakened it? Right? So look at it this way. If I have a child who's never stolen anything, and they've learned you shouldn't steal, they know it's wrong to steal, they've never stolen a thing, and they walk into a candy store, and the clerk goes to the back room, and they're alone in the store, and they could take a piece of gum and walk out, right? If they've never done it before, how likely is it that they'll do it? Unlikely, right? So it's not their character, it's not them. It might even occur to them to do it, right? But now let's say they gave it to temptation. They realized they could do it, and they took the smallest thing they could find in the store, and they were really nervous and excited, and then they snuck out, and they enjoyed it with a guilty feeling, and never told anyone, and never confessed. And now this is something they've done, right? So now it's in their mind, it's part of their being. Now the next time they're in that store, and they're in a situation, are they the same, more, or less likely to do it? More. Why?
They got away with it.
Yeah, they got away with it. It's part of them.
Well, they
So-
got that groove.
They got the groove, right?
Got
So
that groove.
psychologically, we'd say now it's part of them. They got the groove.
Now it's taken over.
Spiritually, we'd say it's not even that the nefesh b'amit got stronger by doing that necessarily. What happened was one organ of the nefesh elokit, one aspect, the do not steal aspect, which we saw that's an actual organ of the divine soul. It was weakened by that act. Just like when I'm working out and my shoulder pops, and now for the next year I'm having to be careful how I use my shoulder, and even when it's repaired, I'm aware, and it could recur. Like there's always a bit of a weakness there. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the soul. When an organ is compromised, now there's a weakness in the divine soul, and that weakness is there whether I'm now stealing or not. Right? Mm-hmm. So the child is in the store, and there's a clerk there, and they're with their friends, and don't think about it. It doesn't mean that weakness isn't there because they didn't steal the gum again today. The weakness is there, and they're a child, it's not a rasha, but an adult is not a rasha because they did a sin. They do sins as a result of being at the level of a rasha, right? The sins are the result of the weaknesses in the divine soul. So the definition is not, I'm a tzaddik or a rasha or a beinoni because I have or haven't sinned. It's the opposite. I'm a rasha, that means that I'm susceptible to sinning, and therefore I sin. If I'm a Beinoni, it means I don't have any weaknesses in my divine soul, so I'm not going to sin. So I'm not a Beinoni because I haven't sinned. I don't sin because I'm at the level of a Beinoni. So looking at it that way, I may have chronologically sinned. I may have done that. But I've now strengthened my divine soul to the point where now that act that I did, it no longer informs me. Now the child goes back into the store, or as an adult, and the fact that as a child they stole a piece of gum, they've strengthened their nefesh elokit through normal tshuva and through learning and through commitment to this is the right thing to do, where now there's basically no effect anymore, right? There's no weakness in the divine soul anymore, and so it's as if they've never sinned, because the residue of the sin, call it defect of the sin, is no longer there. It's been worked out, and they're at full strength again. So from that perspective, you can say a Beinoni is someone who has never sinned and would never sin because they're at that level, right? They look in their divine soul like a person who has never sinned. They no longer have the defect that would cause. It's been completely repaired and brought back to full strength. It's a tricky one, but it's a very useful one, because we don't want to look at the Beinoni as, okay, when's the last time they sinned? They haven't sinned for 6 months. Okay, they reached the level of being a Beinoni. It's not about that. Could they ever sin? It's a different level. Could they ever sin? No. If I look at this person's soul, I'm looking at the X-ray of their soul, and I see no leftover of anything that looks like a sin. They look like someone who's never sinned. And they don't have the weakness of that, therefore they're not going to sin in the future either. The level they're at, their divine soul is simply never going to let them sin. So what it is it's not the past and the future chronologically the Alter Rebbe was talking about. It's the past and the future as they are contained in the present. Yeah, chronologically I may have stolen gum as a boy, but right now in the present, that doesn't show up. That's not here. Right? My divine soul doesn't register that. In the present, my past is I've never sinned as a Beinoni. And also in the future, yeah, a Beinoni still has free will, and a Beinoni could decide, enough of this Beinoni business, let me go and try some sinning, right? They have free will, they can do it. But at their state right now, the way they are, the divine soul will never let them consider that, right? Free will could override it in the future, but the way it looks now, the future that's contained in the present, they never will sin.
Does guilt come in there? You might have felt some guilt after stealing this thing and felt so bad
That
and
was-
want to do it again.
Certainly as a Russia, they would have felt guilt for having done the sin, and that would have led to tshuva and perhaps improving myself. But once you hit the level of a Beinoni, you've worked out that sin. That's an interesting question. I haven't read on it, but my take is, at the level of Beinoni, it's a waste of energy to be thinking about guilt for things I've done when I wasn't a Beinoni. Because I've done tshuva, I've fixed the weakness in myself, I've committed myself to doing well, and now my energy is spent trying to help people around me and trying to do good things. The sense of like, oh, I'm still guilty about something I did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that's actually, we think of that as another way the Nefesh B'Mit gets at you. Being overly guilty about something for which you've actually done tshuva and now you're doing well at is just another way for Nefesh B'Mit to kind of take the drive out of your game and get you to feel bad about yourself, so now you do another sin. So we really see guilt, misplaced guilt, as something coming from Nefesh B'Mit. It's not quite a sin, but it's a problem. We don't want to get into it. Yeah.
So it's really let it go.
Yeah, I guess a Beinoni, in that sense, a Beinoni will have let go that stuff appropriately. Not let it go like, well, I sinned and I never apologized and whatever, I'm going to let it go and not worry about it. They've let go appropriately because they're no longer responsible. They have been, accountable for it. So they've been fully accountable for it. They've done the work necessary to not do it again, and now they can let it go appropriately. Yeah.
So they evaluate their own work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, not just them. Usually in this system you would have a mashpia, a mentor. So we're not so good at assessing ourselves, but no one's supposed to say, yeah, I'm a Beinoni, and no one's supposed to say, well, you can. You can say, I seem to be a level of Beinoni. You can say that. But generally it's something where people don't assume they're a Beinoni, they assume they're a Rasha. Remember that first oath where you said, look at yourself as like a Rasha, consider yourself a Rasha. Even if the whole word says you're a tzaddik, consider yourself like a Rasha. But we'll get to what that really means. We're about to answer the punchline on that. So there's two sides to that, right? But ultimately, this is not something you want to do completely on your own because we don't have good self-awareness. We tend to give ourselves a lot of benefit of the doubt. And in this system, there's a very, very long-standing custom of having a mashpia, a mentor, who you consider to be well advanced in the path of self-improvement and who you ask for their advice. And so when you feel like you got work to do, you bring it to them and they say, yeah, try this, learn this, use this meditation, and usually work under the guide of mashpia, especially as a young adult.
I like it.
Yeah, yeah.
So you could say that you had like a 90% guilt you got rid of, and that 10% was the little motivating factor that allowed you to recognize or have some awareness that something needed to be adjusted.
Yeah, I'll buy that. I'll buy that. You know, there's always, whatever level you're at, you can always do better.
Yeah.
And it's a nice drive to say, okay, say Joe Beinoni is out there, but Joe Beinoni, you know, still has work to do on the essence of their soul, and they could feel maybe something like a form of motivating guilt that they could really work more on that and transform more of that.
Something else to motivate.
So yeah, but usually a Beinoni's life is defined by struggle anyways. So a Beinoni is not the kind of person that's looking for guilt to motivate them. A Beinoni is highly motivated to keep fighting on a constant basis against the drive of the animal soul, which is always present. So Beinoni is not the kind of person that you know, has to look for motivation, typically. They're very, very motivated.
Could you do me a favor and recap all three things again? I know the first one is the higher level of tshuva.
Yeah, so
And the third one is the godly soul always wins out.
Yeah.
Number one. And the second one is...
yeah, so the second and third are related. Because second is also the godly soul always wins out.
Okay, I was gonna
But that's
do that.
more, I'm looking at that as a commitment of willpower. Like, I've made a conscious commitment, I'm never going to let thought, speech, and action express for never spend meat, I'm never going to entertain it. And as long as I have that commitment, like a soldier in an army, now I'm a Beinoni, and that commitment's never going to let me sin. As long as I am a Beinoni and have that commitment, I can't sin, I haven't sinned.
Okay, so 2 and 3 are very close.
Yeah, but 2, I'm looking more from the garments of the soul versus the essence of the soul. And 3, I'm looking more at the nefesh elokit and b'amit and their relative strengths, and is there any defect left in nefesh elokit?
So the second one is more of a reprogramming of the garments of the soul. Would you say that?
A control of the garments of the soul.
Control
Yeah,
of
yeah.
Programming, okay.
Well, I
Not
don't know if you can program the, I mean, at any time you could have a thought and follow that thought. I guess reprogramming in terms of the brain, okay. Yeah, I'll buy that.
Okay.
And there's others, right? I mean, this is a big, big conversation. I presented 3 that I think are kind of main themes in how people explain this. But like I said, that a Beinoni never has and never will sin, this is very definitive of what a Beinoni is, and there's a lot of discussions and a lot of ways of looking at it. I give you the 3 kind of biggest explanations. And when we read, I like how it's phrased here. So let's read the Rebbe notes. Let's go paragraph by paragraph around on the English notes.
The Rebbe notes, the question is well known, that is, with regard to the statement that the Beinoni is one who has never transgressed, the following question is commonly raised.
Sure, let's go around, yeah.
Is it not possible through repentance and subsequent divine service that one attain the rank of Beinoni despite his previous sins? After repenting, one can rise even to the level of tzaddik. Surely then, the rank of Beinoni is not beyond his reach.
Go on, the Rebbe.
The Rebbe answers this question in the following manner. When the Alter Rebbe states that the Beinoni has never transgressed, he does not mean that the Beinoni has never sinned in his life as a human being, but that in his life as a Beinoni, he has no history of sin. The Beinoni's present spiritual state is such that sin in the past as well as in the future has no place in his life. He would not sin even if he were subject to the same temptations and trials which led him to sin in the past. It is therefore true to state that from the perspective of his present state, he has never sinned.
So this is more like version 2, right? But we see the question, right? Can't you do tshuva and become even a tzaddik? So surely if you've sinned, you become a Beinoni. So it can't mean that someone who sinned can now never be a Beinoni. It means something else, right? Likewise,
The Alter Rebbe states that Beinoni would never sin, is to be understood in the same vein. The intention is not that it is impossible for him to sin. He does not, after all, lose his freedom of choice. Rather, as explained above, the present state is such that it precludes sinning in the future, despite the trials that the future may bring.
right? So at his state now, he never would or she never would, but that doesn't change free will, right? Any person at whatever level could decide to drop that level and do something else. But at the level of being a Beinoni, they never have, never would.
To be classified as a true Beinoni, one must fulfill these conditions. For if one's spiritual state precludes his sinning only under present conditions, but he would succumb to sin when he's subject to the temptations of the past or those the future may bring that he is in potentia. A rasha, he could and would sin, except that the prevailing circumstances are not sufficiently conducive for him to do so.
This is more version 3, right? Okay, he hasn't sinned, he's committed himself, hasn't sinned, and maybe he's got a good record, but what's the state of the divine soul? Is there any potential? Is there any weakness? And remember my Michelle Pfeiffer example, right? So I'm not going to flirt with anyone in life, but if Michelle Pfeiffer smiled at me, well, right? So if there's some situation where I might sin, that means I'm not the level of Beinoni. Even if I've got a good record and I've made a commitment and I haven't sinned, if I would steal $50 million but not $20, then that means I'm not a Beinoni. You got to be at full strength of your divine soul, so there's no potential. You just never would under any circumstances. Very, very lofty level. In the same vein,
the Alter Rebbe concludes, the name Rasha refers to one who sins in thought, speech, and action, has never again in the state of Beinoni been applied to him, however temporarily. For the Beinoni has reached a state where sin is precluded under any circumstances, whether of the past or the future.
and this is more or less, Rick, what you said. Right? As a Beinoni, he or she hasn't sinned. Right? So when they weren't a Beinoni, they did sin. Now they're Beinoni, they don't sin. But that doesn't mean you can be a Beinoni and then a Rasha and then a Beinoni and a Rasha, right? There's more to it than that.
It's back to the fact that everybody starts off as a Russia probably and then obtains the state.
God willing, yeah.
God willing. It remains to be understood, however, why such a lofty person is considered merely a Beinoni, not a tzaddik. This matter is now clarified.
Right, so remember, this is supposed to take the place of Yechidus with the Alter Rebbe, of a personal audience with the Alter Rebbe, and all his Hasidim that couldn't see him anymore were reading these pamphlets and these books because they couldn't get in to see the Rebbe, and they wanted to see this is the new way of having a personal audience with the Rebbe, and we have to learn this book. And they've been reading in the chapter 12, and they still don't know what is a Beinoni. What's the difference between a Beinoni and tzaddik? You told me a Beinoni is something that never has, never will sin in any tiny way. That's a tzaddik. What's the difference, right? So we've been learning for 12 chapters, and now finally we get to what is the distinction. It doesn't have to do with behaviors, right?
It doesn't have to
It doesn't with the garments. The garment, thought, speech, and action, that's my soul's behavior. It has only to do with the essence of the soul and what's going on. The Chachma Bina Da, the Seichel, the intellect, and then the Midot, Chesed, Gvur, Tiferet, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, and Malchut, so my emotions and how I interrelate to people and how I express. But not how I express in thought, speech, and action. How my soul spiritually expresses itself, that becomes thought, speech, and action. Ach, Mahut v'atzmut, Nefesh Elokit, Shehen Eser B'chinoteha.
However, the essence and being of the divine soul, which are its 10 faculties, the 3 soul powers of intellect and the 7 emotional faculties are referred to as the essence of the divine soul, in contrast with the soul's garments, thought, speech, and action, which serve merely as outlets and means of expression for the soul's essential faculties.
So the divine soul, its 10 faculties, lo lahen lavadan ha-melucha v'ha-memshala ba'ir ktana.
Do not hold undisputed sovereignty and sway over the small city. the body. For as shall be explained later, the faculties of the animal soul, too, exercise some degree of control over the body through awakening in one's heart desires for worldly pleasures, which in turn cause forbidden thoughts to enter his mind.
And so if you remember that mashal, that example of the small city, which we revisit here. So even though on the outside and behaviors, a Beinoni looks like a tzaddik, and thought, speech, and action is at 100% in every sense, on the inside, the identity of the soul, as we've said a few times already, all the faculties of the animal soul are at full strength, and it is fighting away. Right? So if I'm a city, the one king, the divine soul king, has control of the city and has conquered the city and is expressing through the city, but the other king, right, the animal soul king, is still fighting, is still attacking the city, is still trying to get in, is still trying to get over the walls, and it's only because the divine soul ruler is so vigilant and so strong, and makes sure their swords are always sharp, and their sentries are always on high alert, and their army is always trained and well fed. And it's only because they have a high level of vigilance that they're keeping the other king out of the city entirely, and the other king can never enter in. But the city could be completely surrounded. It could be under siege 24/7. Right? It's not that the other king has stopped fighting. It's that the divine soul has strengthened itself so that it's just always vigilant, it's always at 100%, and it's never allowing the other king to express. And I'll share a little piece of Steinsaltz on this. It's short. The Beinoni is one who must constantly guard his frontiers, and he's one who does so successfully. The Rasha is one whose frontier has breaches, whereas the Tzaddik has no frontiers at all. The Tzaddik has achieved a permanent peace. No battles rage within him because there are no frontiers. There are no two domains because all is one domain. All right. So from the perspective of the city and the battle, in a Rasha, there's actually holes in the wall, and the invading army has actually gotten through, and they're fighting in the city, and the two kings are actually trying to go block to block and seize control of the city and have control over it, and it's just a mess, right? So there's breaches in the frontier. The tzaddik has not just won the battle, but they actually sat down with the other king and they became friends. And they convinced them that their way was the best way, and now the second king is really one of the most loyal officers of the first king. And basically, it's all one realm, and the walls don't even matter, right? The walls are there, but everybody's on one side, right? So the first king has won over the second king, and they're loyal friends, and he's his actual best ally. The Beinoni, the war is still going on, right? Nobody's given up, and the animal soul king is ramming at the walls and trying to dig under and throwing catapult missiles over, whatever the animal soul can do. But the divine soul has just decided it's committed to strengthening and protecting the city. It's never going to let anyone get through. So the walls are good, the army is strong, and the city is secure under the control of the divine soul. But the animal soul has not given up, has no intention to. And you can live your whole life with that constant struggle. And as long as you maintain your boundaries of your city, and the divine soul keeps having access to completely thought, speech, and action, that's a Beinoni. What's happening with the animal soul? It's not the Beinoni's necessarily. It's not the Beinoni's role to completely transform the entire other soul. That's not necessarily in their potential, right? Their role is to express thought, speech, and action, and what's happening in the faculties of the soul, that's the job of a tzaddik in many ways. Beinoni can work on it, but they're probably not going to get to the level of tzaddik where there's just no battle anymore. There's always going to be this. Yeah, that's a good spot to stop, right? Any questions that we've gone over today? We're taking a deep look at the Beinoni in chapters 12 and 13, and then we'll go on with the two techniques to become a Beinoni, the short-long path, the long-short path and short-long path, and then the rest of the book is many tools and meditations, the most profound stuff you'll see to inspire you for a life of practice. Yeshikoach.